Welcome to Neurodivergent Faith, a podcast to help you navigate the beautiful and complicated intersection of neurodivergence and Christian faith and practice. My name's Josh Davis. I'm autistic, ADHD, a spiritual director, and an ordained pastor. And I'm delighted to have you join me as we explore the unique ways neurodivergent people experience God, worship, community, and scripture, along with special interests, sensory and attention differences, social and communication challenges, and much more. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Neurodivergent Faith. Today, I've got a solo episode for you where I'm going to dive into a tension that many of us have lived inside of, especially those of us who've been formed in tight-knit families or faith communities or immigrant spaces or collective cultures. These are cultures where belonging is everything. And often in those spaces, there's a quiet, unspoken hierarchy. The group matters. The atmosphere matters. Harmony matters. And somewhere beneath all of that, you matter too, but not always in the way that your nervous system needs. So I'm calling this episode Child Sacrifice for the Sake of the Community. And I recognize that's a really dramatic title, but I don't use that language lightly because for some of us, what was offered up again and again and again was not just preference, it was our bodies, our limits, our no, our autonomy, our sense of safety, our personhood. These were offered up again and again out of a desire to preserve belonging, to protect reputation, to keep the room steady and calm. Maybe you remember moments like this from your childhood, a room that was too loud, but leaving would draw attention or make people uncomfortable somehow. A gathering that overwhelmed you, but staying was what good kids did. Sitting still and quiet at the table for hours while the adults talked. That's what good kids did. Maybe you grew up with these moments of an embrace that you didn't want, or some other form of physical affection that you did not want to give or receive, but refusing would be rude. And so slowly, sometimes invisibly, a pattern begins to form. Override yourself to keep the peace. And I want to say this up front, gently and clearly. Many of our parents were doing the best they could with what they knew and with what they had been given themselves. They were trying to protect something real, something good, connection, community, survival, belonging. I definitely feel compassion as I think about that. And also, there's grief, because a child's nervous system doesn't interpret intention. It interprets experience. And what the body can learn from those experiences are messages like, my discomfort is a problem. My needs are too much. My body doesn't get a vote. Other people's comfort matters more than my safety. And if that happens in spiritual spaces, that kind of formation, we may even begin to call it holiness, self-sacrifice, dying to self, being others focused. But there's a quiet distortion that can slip in. Ignoring your nervous system is not the same as spiritual maturity. In fact, when I think about spiritual maturity, I believe spiritual maturity is integration of mind, heart, and body. It's not dissociating from the body in order to live out of the mind. It's not cutting off the mind and the heart in order to live centered in the body. It is an integration. One day, I believe Jesus will present us whole, body, soul, spirit, mind, heart, integrated. And that's my definition of spiritual maturity. That's what I'm moving towards myself, and I encourage others to move towards. Silencing your distress is not the same as Christ-likeness. Sometimes it's self-abandonment. You've heard Jesus say, If anyone wants to follow me, they should deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. But self-denial and self-abandonment are very different. We'll talk about that in a minute. In this episode, we're going to move slowly. We're going to name what happens when the collective is consistently prioritized over the individual, especially what happens in the mind and the heart and the body of a child. We're going to talk about consent, about body autonomy, about the difference between a tantrum and a meltdown. And we're going to sit with a story from the Gospel of Mark, a moment where the crowd keeps moving and one voice cries out, and Jesus stops and listens. So, if you've spent years overriding your body to keep others comfortable, this is an invitation to consider a different way of honoring Jesus, a different way of honoring yourself, and a different way of honoring your community. So as you listen today, notice what stirs. What thoughts come through your mind? What feelings of resonance or resistance do you feel in your body? So let's take a moment to breathe together, and then we'll jump in. As a kid growing up, I remember how deeply my parents cared about the collective, about the church, about the family reputation, about the people who were guests in our home, about the comfort of others in the room. And sometimes that meant my discomfort was minimized or even dismissed altogether. If something was too loud in a gathering, the priority was not my sensory threshold, it was the atmosphere of the room. If I was overwhelmed at an event, the concern was not my nervous system, it was how it might look to other people or what other people might think. Even now, as an adult, if sometimes I need to step outside, the unspoken message is don't draw attention. Don't make this about you. Other people are fine. Why can't you just stay? The way that we honor the community is to stay through everything, in every moment, to just be in the room. And now I understand this whole mindset with a lot more compassion. I think my parents were trying to preserve harmony, to protect belonging, and they were navigating community expectations. And as an adult myself, and as a parent to neurodivergent kids, I've done the same thing. So I hold that with a lot of compassion and understanding. But here's what a child can internalize. You might have gotten the message, my body is less important than the group, or my discomfort is a disruption, or I got this a lot, my needs are selfish, or my sensitivity threatens unity somehow. Especially in faith communities, we can absorb this idea that self-sacrifice always equals holiness. But ignoring your nervous system is not the same thing as spiritual maturity. Again, I'd invite you to see spiritual maturity as integration, as wholeness, bringing your mind, your heart, and your body together, loving the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your mind, with all of your soul, with all of your strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself, not sinning against yourself so that you can love your neighbor, or sinning against your neighbor so you can love yourself. Jesus invites us to love our neighbors as ourselves. So I'll say that again. Ignoring your nervous system is not the same thing as spiritual maturity. What would it be like to bring your whole self, including your nervous system, honestly before God, and to let Jesus work inside you in your unique nervous system? Silencing distress to keep others comfortable is not the same thing as Christ-likeness. Sometimes it's self-abandonment. And I want to just take a moment to look at the distinction between self-abandonment and self-denial, because I do believe that Jesus calls us to deny ourselves to follow him. And as I look at Jesus' example, when Jesus denied himself, he knew the goodness of what he was laying down. He knew the worth. He stayed connected to himself, even as he laid his life down, connected to his pain, connected to his distress, connected to his thirst, his bodily needs. Self-abandonment is to leave myself, to dismiss myself, to distance myself from myself in order to quote unquote show love to others. But self-denial is to say, actually, this need I have is valid and it's important. And willingly, I choose to lay it down in this moment. And I may choose to circle back later and find a way to meet that need or ask God to meet that need somehow. It is not to ignore my own needs or pretend like they don't exist. Some of us have been taught to deny ourselves, but really what we were handed was a definition of self-abandonment. And some of us still think that's what Jesus wants from us, desires from us. I would encourage you to talk to Jesus about that, to explore that together. Are there ways that you've equated self-abandonment with self-denial? And what would it look like to follow Jesus in denying yourself without abandoning yourself? Here's another example that may seem small on the surface, but I can tell you from experience, it wasn't small in my body and it wasn't small in terms of its effects on my lifetime. And that is this. I was often required to hug or kiss or give some other physical affection to adults when I didn't want to. Oh, just go give them a hug. Don't be rude. They'll feel bad. Just do it. And again, I understand the intention. Parents want our children to be kind. They want to avoid awkwardness. They want to respect elders. They don't want great grandma to get her feelings hurt because she doesn't know how to manage her feelings. And if she gets her feelings hurt, it could ruin everyone's day. But then somehow it becomes the child's responsibility to give beyond what feels safe to them in order to keep great grandma from getting her feelings hurt. And that's not okay. Here's what a child's nervous system can learn. Other people's comfort is more important than yours. Your hesitation is wrong. I can even remember many times where I had this really strong feeling of disgust in my body, but I had to push through it, paste a smile on my face, and offer someone physical affection, even though I was completely disgusted. And then I thought my disgust is wrong, when really it's just my body's response to something that doesn't feel good, to something that doesn't sit well. Even now, as I go back to some of those experiences, I can feel this cringe, disgust in my body. And so many times I had to push through that. Otherwise, I would have been punished. And I had to push through that for my parents' reputation, for, again, the comfort of the adults in the room. And for a touch sensitive child, especially many neurodivergent kids and adults are touch sensitive or even touch averse. That can be deeply dysregulating. Um, I know for me, I can't remember a single time in my life where I have pursued a hug for my own benefit. I can't even imagine moving towards a hug to help me feel better. That's just not something that my body registers as helpful It actually registers either as neutral or as deregulating, more distressing. And so I just would never have moved towards those things for my own comfort or my own soothing. But I often was forced to move towards those things, even when it was distressing to me. And I was taught to override myself in order to preserve harmony. But I believe that consent begins in childhood and body autonomy begins in childhood. I'm just learning about this now because I wasn't taught this growing up. And it's only been in recent years that I've even started to think about body autonomy, that God has given each person the sacred responsibility of stewarding their lives, including stewarding their own bodies. And so I'm just trying to learn some new ways, encouraging my kids and some other people around me, and encouraging myself towards body autonomy. Um, Teaching our kids that they can wave instead of giving a hug, or they could offer a fist bump or a high five, or they could simply say hello, or they could speak a phrase from one of their favorite movies, or they could sing a song as a way of greeting. This isn't creating selfishness. It's encouraging each of us to think about, what can I offer cheerfully? What can I give willingly? The Lord loves a cheerful giver. So I often ask that question: what can I give here cheerfully to promote good relationship, healthy relationship? That creates safety rather than pushing ourselves or pushing our children to give beyond what they're comfortable with in order to preserve harmony. So let's talk for a few minutes about the difference between tantrums and meltdowns. Because on the surface, tantrums and meltdowns can look almost identical, right? But tantrums get read by other people as selfish, as rebellious, as sinful, while a meltdown is simply a sign of neurological overwhelm. So here's some ways that tantrums and meltdowns might look the same. On the outside, you might see loud crying, throwing oneself on the floor, screaming or yelling, hitting or kicking, slamming doors, using hurtful words, a sharp or disrespectful, quote unquote, disrespectful tone. From the outside, they might feel indistinguishable. And this is where so many of us were misunderstood. And so many neurodivergent kids still are being misunderstood because the behavior looks the same, but the experience inside the body is not the same. And where the behavior is coming from is very different. So I would encourage us to see the behavior and not move so quickly to assume or to interpret what we think that behavior means, but simply to see the behavior and get curious about where it's coming from. That might mean observing, it might mean asking questions, probably not in the moment of the tantrum or meltdown, but later you could ask some questions to help understand it better. It might mean trying some things out to see, does this help? Does this help? Does this help? To get a feel for whether this is a tantrum or a meltdown. Where is this coming from on the inside of the person? A tantrum is often about expression with direction. There's a goal. Something is desired. I want a clear outcome from this. And a tantrum says, I want this, or I don't like this, or I'm trying to change what's happening. And usually, somewhere in the nervous system, there's still a thread of control. The behavior could escalate, but it can also pause, shift, or stop, especially if the desired outcome is reached or no longer seems possible, right? So when I realize if I'm throwing a tantrum and I get what I want, then all of a sudden I can calm down, maybe very quickly, maybe instantly. Or if I'm in the middle of a tantrum and something surprises me, I might stop for a second, right? Or if I'm in the middle of a tantrum and I realize I'm not going to get what I want, I might be able to de-escalate at that point. But a meltdown, on the other hand, is not about getting something. It's what happens when the nervous system has carried too much for too long, too much sensory input, too much emotional strain, too many unexpected changes. And finally, the body just says, I can't hold this anymore. There's no strategy here. There's no social calculation or manipulation. There's no hidden agenda. It's only overwhelm. During a meltdown, the rational brain begins to go offline and stress hormones flood the body. Sensory input becomes heightened and unbearable, and control is not accessible. And this is not defiance. This is a nervous system in distress. And unlike a tantrum, a meltdown doesn't resolve when someone gets their way. It resolves when the body finds its way back to safety through time, through reduced sensory input or soothing sensory input, through quiet, through presence. Another quiet distinction is that tantrums tend to be relational. They happen in the presence of others because they're trying to influence something. But meltdowns can happen anywhere. Even and often they happen in solitude. Many people who experience meltdowns aren't trying to be seen. They're simply trying to survive the moment. And one other thing I'll mention that often goes unnoticed is not all overwhelm explodes outward. Some of it turns inward. And I think especially for kids who were punished, severely reprimanded for having outward expressions of overwhelm, if they were able to control it, often they redirected those internally. That was my experience. It turns inward into a shutdown where the same flood of overwhelm doesn't erupt like a volcano, but it collapses in on itself and can turn into numbness, disconnection, silence, no release or expression, no catharsis, just quietly enduring what is still too much. So, adults, when you encounter these moments, either in children in your life or in other adults, or even in yourself, I want to invite you to resist the urge to immediately assign motive. Resist the urge to assume you know where this behavior is coming from, and instead get curious. It could mean instead of asking, how are they trying to control the situation? You ask, what might their body be overwhelmed by right now? I heard a story of a little girl who was melting down in church, and the adults just thought she was being rebellious and stubborn, and they didn't know what to do with her. But then a neurodivergent adult volunteer stepped in and recognized she was just hot and she just needed a fan to be blown on her. And all of a sudden, her body calmed down and there was no more outward expression. There was no more loud cries or tears. When we assume manipulation, often we're going to move towards control. But when we recognize overwhelm, we move toward compassion. And for those who were treated as though they're meltdowns or tantrums, those who were corrected when they needed comfort, those who were disciplined when they needed safety, and often that discipline meant even more distressing sensory input piled on top of what was already overwhelming. There's a quiet relearning here. You're allowed to listen more gently to what your body is trying to say. Here's the layer that can complicate it spiritually. At Neurodivergent Faith, we're always looking at the intersection between faith and neurodivergence. And if affection was required in order to be good, or if staying still and quiet at the table was required in order to be a good, godly son or daughter, or fill in the blank, right? We can carry those things into our relationship with God. We may assume that closeness must always require us to sacrifice our comfort. We may struggle to recognize the difference between genuine warmth and forced compliance. But I believe the God revealed in Jesus never coerces. He invites, he calls, he waits. Love that is demanded is not love. If you're a parent who's listening, I just want to say clearly, we can teach kindness without coercion. We can model warmth without overriding autonomy. We can say, you don't have to give a hug. Would you like to wave or give a high five? And that simple shift can teach a child, your body belongs to you. You're allowed to choose. You can be kind without abandoning yourself. That's powerful formation. So let's listen together to this story from Mark chapter 10, verses 46 through 52. And we're going to come back to this story a few times this season, looking at it from different angles. But for now, just listen and see what you notice.
Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road.
What moves me about this story is there's a crowd, a whole crowd, and there's one man crying out. The crowd prioritizes order, but Jesus prioritizes the person. The crowd says, "Be quiet." Jesus asks a question and listens for a response. The collective was moving, momentum was happening, and Jesus stops. Jesus interrupts it all for one distressed voice. He doesn't prioritize efficiency. He does not protect the comfort of the group. He stops, and then he asks, "What do you want me to do for you?" That reorders something in me, because it tells me that honoring one person's distress does not have to threaten the kingdom. It can actually reveal the kingdom. If you were taught to override your body to keep others comfortable, I believe that Jesus is not asking you to override yourself now. He stops, he asks, he listens. Imagine Jesus turning toward you, not embarrassed by you, not worried about the crowd's opinion or the optics of the moment, not prioritizing efficiency over your nervous system. Jesus stops and says, "What do you want me to do for you?" And then he waits, as long as it takes for your response. Your response might come in words or sounds or images or just a sense that you share with him and he understands. As we close today, I want to remind us that healthy community does not require erasure. Healthy community does not require self-abandonment. Is there give and take? Absolutely. Is there compromise? Absolutely. Is there space for me to lay down my preferences or my needs for the sake of someone else? Absolutely. But true unity is not uniform nervous systems. It's not pretending everyone experiences the room the same way. It's not demanding silence for the sake of smoothness. Healthy community makes space, makes accommodations, makes adjustments. If something is too loud for one person, lowering the volume doesn't fracture the body of Christ. It dignifies it. If someone needs to step outside, that's not rebellion, that's wisdom. And when children learn that their needs always come second to the group's comfort, they can grow into adults who chronically override themselves in order to belong. I know that pattern. I learned to endure discomfort so no one else would feel inconvenienced. I learned to override my body so the room would stay comfortable. And it has taken years to unlearn that holiness is not measured by how quietly you suffer. Thanks for listening today. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me. My email address is in the show notes. And I'm glad to be in this conversation with you and on this journey together with you. I look forward to hearing from you. See you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of Neurodivergent Faith. If you like what you heard, consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing this with someone who might need to hear it too. And as you continue to wrestle with faith and identity, remember, your unique brain is a part of God's creative genius. Whether it's the way you process scripture, engage with prayer, or connect with others, you are a reflection of the vast creativity of our Creator. May you trust that God knows you, delights in you, and is working in you exactly as you are. And may you know that you are not walking this journey alone. See you next time.